We have to face the fact that unfortunately huge chunks of the US population don't see some people as human. Whoa, geez. That's a premise that I can't go there with you. Like, we can't engage in a conversation if you don't see some people as human. And I think that that's the case in terms of immigration, in terms of immigration detention, in terms of criminal justice. There are radical disagreements over basic ideas about humanity. That's also why, to me, I think it's a better thing to say, do you want a smart justice system or do you want a stupid one?
She's back.
Can you see me now?
I see you now. I have to tell you, I was my girls in my book club were so excited when I told them that you were going to join the podcast. They were just thrilled. It's going to be a Salt and Straw book club next week when we have one.
Can I send you some ice cream and you could surprise them?
Oh my God, you're so sweet. They would love that. I love that.
Should we just launch in and talk about this?
Yeah, launch in. Go for it.
My main passion in my life that's been the through line forever is what is the history behind, like, why does the United States lock up more people than anywhere else in the world? Like, why is that? Like, we're the, arguably the most developed world. Like, why are we doing that? What's the history? What's the science behind that? And
what's the finances behind it?
Yeah.
2 hours later.
Okay, guest reveal. How excited are we?
I'm so excited!
I went and did a little digging for you, and I found for you Dr. Baz Dreisinger, who is a professor at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York.
Oh.
She's amazing. She's the founding academic director of the Prison to College Pipeline program. And I was like, I don't know, like, how many people in the world could possibly be studying like the American prison system, like vis-a-vis the rest of the world? Like, I'm sure there's a handful, but like, I don't know, like, are they going to be accessible? She wrote this book called Incarceration Nations, A Journey to Justice in Prisons Around the World. So she literally studies our prison system.
Around the world.
Oh
yeah. My God, you found her. I have chills.
I found your person. Her book was reviewed by the New York Times, by NPR. It was named a Best Book of the Year by Washington Post.
Well, I can't wait to dig into all of this.
Yeah.
And join the conversation.
On the podcast today, we have the founder and CEO of Salt and Straw, Kim Malek. Kim is wonderful. She's everything you would expect in the CEO of an ice cream company. She is charming. She is sweet. What I didn't expect was her curiosity, which was the U.S. prison system. So on deck today, we've got incarceration and ice cream. A very unlikely pairing, but exactly what I wanted to happen on this podcast, which is pairing two people who might not otherwise meet and giving somebody like Kim a chance to dig into a topic that she's not necessarily known for, but has a lot of great questions and curiosities around. So we paired her with Dr. Baz Dreisinger, who is the founder and director of the Incarceration Nations Network. I want to acknowledge something at the top before we get into it here, which is that it was such a privilege to have this conversation, but also this conversation very much came from a place of privilege. We are three white women discussing a quote-unquote justice system that disproportionately affects Black and brown men and women and puts them behind bars in the U.S. I do hope that this podcast provides context and brings more people into a really important conversation about what's wrong with the system, how we can do better, maybe think about completely transforming it. I'm super grateful to Baz for joining us and to Kim for her thoughtful questions. I hope you learned something too. I think this is a really important one.
There's nothing like a pairing of ice cream and prisons. But
it might be the first. I think we're doing it here.
I'm sure. Actually, no, Ben and Jerry's, they've been involved in the fight against mass incarceration.
That's true.
But I'll let you tell us and the listeners and Kim a little bit about yourself. And then I'm going to just let Kim take it from here. And I'll jump in with some questions and things. I know she's probably got a bunch, but tell us a little bit about your work.
I am based at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. I've been a professor there for the last 21 years or so, 22 years. I don't know. Time is flying. I founded John Jay's Prison to College Pipeline program. Well, prior to that, even I was a journalist for many years covering aspects of race, crime, culture, music, and arts and intersections thereof. And I actually got started in prisons as a volunteer. I was getting a lot of letters from people in prison who read my articles or saw a couple of the documentaries that I produced and wrote back in the early 2000s. And so I got invited into a prison in a maximum security prison in upstate New York a bunch of years ago, about 20 years ago, to be a volunteer. I started volunteering right around the same time I landed at John Jay College, which is obviously devoted to criminal justice and social justice more generally. I founded the Prison to College Pipeline program there, which is, as the name implies, is a university program inside prison that also aims to reverse the school to prison pipeline and funnel people from prison into college, and continues to do that. We celebrate 15 years of the Prison to College Pipeline this next year, which is beautiful. From there, I went on to write Incarceration Nations, my second book, which is obviously about global prison systems. And I know we'll talk some more about that. And I just became increasingly curious about how this was playing out in a global context. And so hence the book. The book then took on a life of its own and became Incarceration Nations Network, which is my current organization, which I am the founder and executive director of. We are about 5-6 years old, and we're a global prison reform organization with partners and projects all over the world. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Amazing. I'm so happy to introduce you to this. Is maybe an episode that I'm like one of the most excited about. So Kim, I'll let you tell us a little bit about like why this topic for you. It was, you said it last when we were talking. It was the last thing that you came to me with, but it felt like the one that you really wanted to dig into. So
I guess this has been a topic that's been a passion and interest of mine for a long time. About 12 years ago, though, I met my partner, Mike, and we adopted 3 children, and all of them are Black. And I think that really gave urgency to this issue as I'm, tending to these little babies and have big dreams for their lives. And this gnawing, concern, that kind of follows you as they're growing up. Like, what could happen? Anything could happen just due to the color of their skin. I got involved with the Oregon Justice Resource Center, which fights mass incarceration in the state of Oregon. They house the Oregon Innocence Project, and, I've done some testifying in front of our state legislature and working to, create cause just on a local or change on a local level. Those are some of the inspirations. I mean, I have 1,500 employees. Many of them have had instances where they've been incarcerated or had some sort of, interaction with the system. And so it's obviously throughout everyone's lives. It's throughout my life in different ways as well. And to me, I've always just, I think the core curiosity for me is like, why would we lock up our most precious resource we have? The original question I had was, does the U.S. really lock up more people than any other industrial, nation? And is it about crime or deeper forces? Like, what's behind this?
So it's interesting you asked that question. Actually, the prior question about why would we do this, and that it just seems out, bizarre. That's actually the premise that I come to this work with every day. What are we doing? This is ridiculous. Like, even if we take the inhumane piece out of it, it's just ridiculous. It's an archaic, absurd model. It is based on, so many premises that are false. And I think it's the thing, for me, it's what prompted me to get involved in this work in the first place. And some of that is because I come to this work not as a criminologist or a lawyer. Everyone assumes when they hear about my work that I am one of those things, and I'm not. My background, I have a PhD in literature and African American studies.
Oh, I never thought about that. Yeah.
I think that benefits. For me, I see that as a benefit to the work, in that I'm always thinking outside the box of it. And I'm always looking at this as this being mass incarceration, whether in the US or in South Africa or Thailand. Like, I'm looking at it as a bizarre thing. So to your question, the other question, Kim, is the U.S. the world's the world's biggest incarcerator? We're actually number 2 now. We were for many years. We have 5% of the world's population, 25% of its prison population. Our numbers are staggering. I often call the US the McDonald's of mass incarceration because, we do everything big. But per capita, we've actually been outdone in the last couple of years by El Salvador. And that is, on account of the state of emergency in that country and the dedication to mass incarceration on those shores and Bukele's administration and so on. When I talk about the US doing it big, it's not only in terms of our numbers, it's also in terms of our system being the quote unquote model for the world and the template for the world. And we, both historically and today, are the pushers and the sellers of mass incarceration to the world. We finance the building of prisons around the world, historically and today. We are seen as the model for this kind of justice around the world. And so our outside presence in this work is not just about, our numbers. It's also about our influence, as it is with everything. We're the US, we export Coca-Cola, we export hip hop, and then we export mass incarceration.
Gosh, it's interesting to hear you say that you don't come to this with a legal background, or I hadn't thought about that. That's really interesting. On this one board that I'm on, I'm the only non-lawyer. And they invited me to join because they want to start involving the kind of, I guess I'll say, broader population, the business community. And it was interesting when I was talking to some friends about this conversation I was going to get to have today over the weekend. I was talking to a friend has multiple, degrees in business and accounting, and he's actually quite progressive. But as I started to talk about this, he interrupted me and said, well, but aren't they all just really hardened criminals? Like, why is this such a passionate topic for you? And I said, gosh, they're not. And he didn't even know what I was talking about. And I just, as we try to broaden the involvement with the broader population of folks and educate people, I mean, what are your thoughts about that sentiment? Aren't they all a bunch of hardened criminals and what that means?
Of course, I hear it all the time. It is the narrative of this administration. These hardened criminals, these savages that we need to send to other shores and so on. It's an enormously destructive narrative. Number one, as you say, it's false. I'm not really sure what hardened criminal means. I believe in the capacity of everyone for change. I don't necessarily think that's going to happen for everyone. But I certainly think it's our job as a society to, give people the best circumstances with which to build and rebuild lives. And so I just object even to that term, hardened criminal. I've seen, in my life and work, and I'm surrounded by people who are in prison, who've been to prison. They're, it's the deepest people in my life are folks who've experienced that. And I've seen people come around and change and, de-harden, so to speak, at all kinds of phases. That's one. Two is just that, the data doesn't back this up. Like, first of all, if we talk about pretrial detention alone, there are huge numbers of people who are legally innocent behind bars. And when we look, this is true in the US, certainly, but when we look outside the US, and especially in the global South and countries like the Philippines, Trinidad, like you're talking about upward Dominican Republic, 70, 80% of systems are people who haven't even been convicted of anything. So you're talking about legally innocent people. And then you got to recognize that you're also talking about, so many countries where substances are illegal, where cannabis is illegal. Add to that a legacy of what is known in the global South as petty offenses. We call them misdemeanors. But throughout the world, you have these old colonial offenses on the books, things like loitering, loud music, using expletives in a public setting. Like, there are lots and lots of people locked up all over the world for these petty offenses. In fact, there's an entire organization devoted to decriminalizing these petty offenses around the world in various countries that used to be colonies. So it's both wrong and inhumane to use that kind of language and talk that kind of talk.
It seems easier to say they're all hardened criminals or they're all bad people, or it's too difficult to fix, even though we're not trying to fix it. We need to completely change it. And I just wonder, what is the world in which, why is it so much harder to lead with empathy and to talk about rehabilitation than it is to just say, lock people up, hardened criminals? Like there's just there's like two lanes and we can't seem to get out of one to get into the other. And so I know not to pivot too quickly into like the rest of the world and who is not using the US as a model, but I'd be curious to hear from you, Baz, like who are the people that are leading with empathy?
I would say instead of thinking about empathy, I would say context. And by context, I mean understanding where people's quote unquote choices come from. And I put choices in quotation marks because when we're talking about systemic inequality, systemic racism that is, built into the foundation of this country, that is built into the way we live, some people don't have choice the way others do. In many communities, crime and, poor choices are normalized. And I think what we're really bad at, and we've always been bad at this in the US, but I think we're now especially bad at it in the era of AI and social media, is like understanding the larger fabric of society from which actions come, from which poor choices are made, from which crime comes. Crime comes from a context. That doesn't justify it. I'm not saying it's all good and, no, not at all. I'm horrified by crime. I want to live in a safe community. We all do. But understanding the context of things and, the root cause of them and the structural, like the systemic stuff behind them is really, really important. And we're terrible at systems think in the US.
To your point about coming from a literature background, I think context is something that we find in fiction and storytelling and literature, and have a deeper understanding. And maybe that does, for me, it leads to empathy, but I think the two are really closely tied together. And so I think that's, again, to bring it back to your background in literature, I think is really interesting.
I also think you're raising an interesting point. Like, what is the point of all of this? And as you had asked Tanya, like, who's doing a good job of, using these systems for something that actually supports people in a positive way? I mean, who are you seeing actually do that? And as it relates to that, like, why is this so partisan? It feels like supporting our communities and our people and making sure that we all are the best we can be and the strongest we could be would be something we would want for our society and our communities.
I think the bipartisan reality, yes, this is a bipartisan issue because justice is bipartisan, safety, which is the end goal of all this, no doubt. And there was a moment, actually, I think in the last, maybe 5 years ago, where there was a lot of actually bipartisan work in this regard.
I thought I saw that. Yeah, even the last Trump administration.
The First Step Act and so on. I mean, those were, somewhat controversial, and there's still a lot of disagreement and division in the movement over whether that was genuine bipartisanship, whether it was the right move, et cetera, et cetera. But it was. I think what's happening now is that we're just, there's agreement that we want safety, but there's just disagreement over what produces safety. In part because the current administration and the current discourse, again, removal of all context, no conversation about systems and structures, entirely blaming bad people, criminals, and so on. And that's very American. Like, America is all about the American dream is me pick myself up by my bootstraps, right? Not recognizing that some people never have boots. Like, we love to remove context. We love to focus on individual choice over and above systems and structures. So this conversation, the current discourse, makes perfect sense in that regard. It's just taken to its logical conclusion. This is entirely about bad people doing bad things. As per the idea of who isn't, talking that way and pursuing such an agenda, I get asked that a lot. The first thing I like to point out is that there's no one country that has all the answers or one place. So much of the work that I and we do at Incarceration Nations Network is to look at pockets of progress everywhere. And there's good work being done in lots of places. So it's not about necessarily pointing to, let's copycat this country, but rather looking at strong organizations that are doing innovative stuff. I think Argentina is a great example of that. The current administration, the Malay administration, is not one you would think of as being, and in fact,
No,
is
I'm surprised
dismantling.
to hear you say that. Yeah.
Right. So from a government perspective, it's quite frustrating. On the other hand, some of our best partners are in Argentina. They're cooperatives that are building, they're formerly incarcerated families who have created cooperatives to ensure inclusion in the labor market. They have some of the best university and prison programs in the world. And, they built this without government, sometimes in spite of government, and usually on a shoestring budget. And so, that, for instance, is a country I would point to and say there's amazing understanding of what movement building is, what solidarity is, what community is, what non-hierarchical movement building is in particular. So, it's really an exciting place for movement. On the other hand, I would point, there are some governments, Scandinavia tends to get a lot of hype, Norway in particular. I have a chapter on Norway in my book. We have partners in Norway. I've been to Finland too, to the prisons. And they've got these open prison models where people are able to leave and remain effectively part of their communities, even as they're incarcerated, which is enormous. Their prisons that are closed have a lot more programming. But what I always point out to people about the, Scandinavian approach is that it can't be looked at in a vacuum.
Right.
What's so powerful about Norway and Sweden and, various places like this is that they have something really radical called social services. They've got an incredible healthcare system, education system. And so it's a holistic social service net that is therefore going to produce less crime, less inequality, which produces less crime. It's kind of a no-brainer,
Right.
More equality equals safer communities. And so generally, when you look at the most unequal societies, the US, South Africa, right? These are some of the most unequal countries in the world. No wonder, Brazil, no wonder the crime rates are as high as they are. They're directly correlated with inequality. So when we want to look at examples, we need to look beyond examples of like the prettier prisons, as I call them, and look at deeper stuff that is preventing crime in the first place. And then when crime occurs, is addressing it in a more humane fashion.
When you think about maybe pockets in the US, do you find places where maybe Portland, I don't know, maybe compared to Chicago or New York, that you see trending differently when it relates to incarceration, rehabilitation?
I think, again, it's more about the programs in the US than it is necessarily about the state. I mean, certainly there are more progressive states. California, for instance, education, not incarceration is a mantra for me and for us at INN. And, looking at what California did in terms of ensuring that every prison was paired with a college, the impact of that, it's enormously thoughtful. I mean, bail and pretrial practices is very state to state. And unfortunately, those states that were taking the lead in that respect, and implementing progressive bail policies like New Jersey, for instance, a lot of that has, unfortunately been backpedaled as a result of backlash. And it's mainly because people get angry. They're angry about crime. And that's also what prevents the rational thinking on it. And the empathy is just people are angry. And the more you stoke their anger, the less they're going to, like as a wise therapist once told me, you never make decisions from a fearful place. And that's exactly what we do with criminal justice, in so many places. So, I mean, look, the college and prison landscape in the US, which the prison to college pipeline is obviously a part of and is very dear to my heart, has grown and flourished thanks to Second Chance Pell, which allows for financial aid access to incarcerated students. We do in the US have some of the most thoughtful restorative justice programs, some of which are our partners. The restorative justice program housed at the Attorney General's office in Washington, D.C., for example, Common Justice, which is an organization based here in New York, There are a number of Impact Justice has a restorative justice program as well. They're based in California. But I think we have a lot to be proud of. We're also in the sense that our movement in the US is very lived experience led. It is there are a lot of high profile organizations run by formerly incarcerated people bringing that wisdom, whereas it wasn't always the case that was so. And so you're seeing a lot of those kinds of grassroots organizations. So there's a lot happening here that's great.
Wow.
That's part of what I'm always reminding people in terms of our work at INN. I'm a favor of exporting good things. I like hip hop. We can export that. That's cool. It's done good for the world. So we can also be exporting some of these positive ideas. And I just see it as like an ecosystem where we can be learning a little bit from everybody. INN operates as a network of partner organization and sort of partner organizations and kind of comrades all over the world who are doing really good stuff, really thoughtful work. And so the more that we can create an ecosystem where we're sharing and exchanging and learning and building from each other, the better justice system is. I also often point out to people that if we were run think about Silicon Valley, how much money they have to throw around to just experiment with this and try this and let's see what happens here. There's so much experimenting we could be doing, but because we're trapped in this prison only paradigm, we're not doing that. We're still thinking like medieval fortresses from the 19th century. It's not the way. And I think transnational work allows us to do that, thinking across borders, thinking philosophically about this issue beyond just, okay, lock them up and throw away the key, or let's make the prisons prettier and better. I mean, I'm actually proud to say that that's getting back to the Norwegian approach, this idea of the open prison model. Technically we have that on the books here in the US. We have educational release. We have work release. It's so rarely used. It's unbelievable. And I think something like that is enormously impactful in terms of allowing someone to remain part of a community as opposed to throwing them away, warehousing them away in a dungeon. And then that, of course, from a logical perspective, makes reintegration easier and reduces the stigma and normalizes, life and work and school. I'm proud that at the Prison to College Pipeline, we actually have one student on educational release, and it took years to fight for that.
That's amazing.
Oh, it shouldn't have taken years, though. That's just so frustrating. That one, and it took years.
But we have one. You have to start with one. This, I don't know, a lot of what you're saying gives me a lot of hope. I mean, even your comments about Argentina, I think you said something like the programs are in spite of the government in some cases. And, just so much talk of community and what the community can do and integrating people back into the community. All of that, I think, is really exciting. I mean, I've had several folks, beautiful stories of people who I've worked with at Salt and Straw who came through, formerly incarcerated. One guy, one of my favorite coworkers, just won this huge award. And he came up to me at the end of this meeting and said, I used to sleep in the doorwell of this building where we're giving this award out. And he's one of our greatest leaders now. And, we don't ask any questions about your background when you apply for a job. And he just tells the most brutal story of trying to get a job when he got out. He had a drug. It was nonviolent. He had it was for drugs. And, it just makes me realize front row seat, A, that we're robbing ourselves from incredibly talented people. I see it firsthand. And B, how freaking hard it is when you get out. I mean, you're working with folks to get college educations. I mean, can you talk a little bit about what that's like? Because I don't think people understand when you walk out those doors, the challenges that you face.
Props to you for engaging in fair chance hiring. That's amazing. That is not what so many people are doing, not just in the US, but around the world.
It's not always easy. We've got great success stories. Sometimes it's hard, but I mean, I so fundamentally believe that these are the talents that we need to unleash, and wherever they come from, we need them.
I mean, there was actually a study done, I want to say it was during the Obama administration, and I believe it was in Michigan, that did a study of people who were hired who had criminal convictions and how much better they were as employees for a whole host of reasons, the commitment and so on. But I think part of that is because
100%.
Yeah, there's recognition that, I mean, you asked, what is that like? I mean, coming out of prison is a never ending uphill battle. People think when we talk about reentry or reintegration, as the rest of the world says it, that it's just like, okay, it sounds so simple, like just you left and now you reenter. First of all, it's not reentry. You were never part of the social fabric to begin with, most likely, because you were so radically excluded because of classism, racism, all of the things. And so it's a misnomer. So you're coming back in, aside from the fact that legal discrimination is everywhere in terms of where you're allowed to live, the hiring practices, it's incredibly hard to get a job.
Voting, yeah,
all the things. And then on top of it, you're carrying around the trauma that you had before prison, the trauma that got added to that in prison, and now the trauma of coming out of prison and, having to reconnect with family, that having to walk around constantly sort of paranoid that somebody's going to find out and look at you a certain way. It never goes away. I mean, I'm not running the prison to college pipeline anymore. I've passed the torch in order to launch INN, but I'm still very close to the students of the 10 years that I built the program, and they're very much my family, and there's somebody going through it at all times. It doesn't matter if they're home 11 years, they're home 1 year. It is a constant battle. It almost never gets easy, and it's there at all times. And I work with students all over the world now facing the same thing. And so having a college degree certainly helps. Actually, the reason that I designed the prison to college pipeline the way that I did, which was to start college on the inside, complete it on the outside, was because college isn't only about the degree. It's about the network. It's about, it's about the community. It's about people who went to Ivy League schools benefit not just because they have the Ivy League degree, but because they have the Ivy League network. And so the idea of creating community and allowing people to network in this way is so important. You don't have that, obviously, coming from prison. And actually at INN, we launched the Global Freedom Scholars Network, which is our global network of justice-involved university students and graduates in 16 countries. And the same thing was happening for them. Like, they were fighting tooth and nail to get access to college in prison. But then when they came home, they didn't know any of their professors. Many of them were doing it by correspondence. And so you're not part of the community. So that network is everything. And, think about our own lives. We're 3 white women here.
I was going to call that out. Yeah.
We've benefited to a massive degree, from the networks and from white skin privilege, but also from whatever networks we had and continue to have. And so, those kinds of things are really important to point out.
Yeah, I always argue my network is my biggest advantage, and I use it every day. And so providing that and building that community, I've never thought about how important that is, as well as having something to connect to when you walk out that door and here's your next step and what you're doing. I think that's so important.
It also occurs to me, as we're having this conversation, we're having it. Right. Period. So which is on its own an incredible thing. And I think that most people, I think about maybe my family or my friends, like most folks' engagement with the justice system, call it what you will, is on the side of crime. Right. So I only think about it if my car is broken into, if I'm assaulted in the street, or, something happens to me. Otherwise, I'm not engaging with it on a day-to-day basis. Right. And I don't see the potential upside of changing it, right? And so I'm not going to engage with it because whatever, we're busy, we don't have time, But I don't have a question here. I think I'm just making a point, is that people don't engage with it, and so they're not thinking about it. And so we only see the downside. We only see fix this problem for me. I'm going to go on with my day.
I would add to that, it's privileged people who don't think about it, right? We have the privilege to not think of it and to not have it be a big factor. Whereas, if you're a person of color in this country, if you're a person coming from certain communities, like you can't not think, you don't have that privilege, right?
Yes.
So
the communities that
absolutely.
are directly impacted, families that are torn apart. Thank you so much for correcting me. You're 100% right.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen with my own kids as I've gotten to know their birth community, they're touched with the criminal justice system left and right. And yet our kids are, captain of the soccer team, A+ students. And it just, that context that you described is so apparent to me. Their story of origin is not that. And their entire community, I think we're wasting so much potential, and it's heartbreaking to me. And like you're saying, I think most people, I remember during COVID, we were working as an organization to make sure that we had the right protocol in Oregon prisons for COVID. And I was telling a friend about this work, and, she said, well, why are you doing that? They're criminals. Why are you worried about COVID protocol? And I remember my partner, Mike, looking at her and saying, well, they didn't get a death sentence. I mean, come on here, like basic humanity and being treated like a human.
The justice system is the foundation of a society, so doing smart justice, like I actually try to move people away from, oh, these are human beings and let's have empathy. I mean, yeah, I'm into that. But I also, we have to face the fact that unfortunately huge chunks of the US population don't see some people as human. Well, that's a premise that I can't go there with you. Like, we can't engage in a conversation if you don't see some people as human. And I think that that's the case in terms of immigration, in terms of immigration detention, in terms of, criminal justice. Like, I think there are radical disagreements over basic ideas about humanity. And that is a sad, sad, sad truth that I have had to face. But that's also why, to me, I think it's a better thing to say, do you want a smart justice system, or do you want a stupid one, one that doesn't make any sense, one that keeps us in this cycle of unsafe communities, of harm being answered with harm, of trauma being, answered with trauma. And if we look at recidivism rates, that's a very flawed way of measuring. It's one way, and it's certainly not complete. But if we look at the ineffectiveness of the system, and then we say, look, do you want a better one or not? We have to, at the same time, acknowledge that there are people in prison who've done some bad things, who've caused harm. But the other factor is that where are we seeing the survivors of that harm being cared for in any way via a prison system? They're not, right? I actually share this story in my book of one of our students in the prison to college pipeline who served 30 years in prison for something that he committed at the age of 17. He carries enormous, weight of that act. He took someone's life. He doesn't minimize it. Every day that date comes on the calendar, he's, very torn up about it because it's real. But maybe it was his 7th parole board that he was denied parole at, they said to him, the victim wants more time from you. And at that point, it had been 22 years. And my first thought was, what are the victims, the survivors, they deserve support. I feel for them too. They lost their son, their brother, whatever it is. And I feel for them. But obviously, at what point do we look up and say, you know what? What is another few years going to give you that 22 didn't give you? Maybe this thing that you think is going to give you the healing and the closure that you deserve is not doing it. And we see that a lot. And a lot of, folks who are engaged in restorative justice work can speak on this but much better than I can. But they will share the data of how much more fulfilling a restorative justice approach is than a traditional legal one where the survivor is all but pushed out of the system. I've had a lot of deep engagements with survivors all over the world in the course of this work. And the ones that had the opportunity to engage with the person who caused the harm in whatever capacity, certainly have a different level of healing. I'm not saying restorative justice is the answer and the magic bullet. Nothing is that simple. Justice is messy. Life is messy. People are messy. But certainly it's a really important thing that we need to keep in mind. And so one of my responses when people come at me with, what about the rapists and the murderers question, is to really turn the tables and focus on the survivors of harm, and how they are being treated, cared for, or not cared for.
Wow, I love that. I had never considered the survivors of harm piece. Yeah.
That is so valuable to me personally as I have these conversations, just in terms of, do we want safer communities? Do you want more support for survivors? Like turning the lens almost the other way around and saying, like, what are the outcomes we want here? And let's work towards those as being the focuses of those conversations. I think that's really incredible.
I think it's important to talk about tough on crime. Tough on crime is soft on crime. It doesn't work. War on drugs is not the way. It does not, drugs are here. They're not going anywhere. The war has been lost. I think that we need to do, as a movement, a better job of marketing marketing the message as such. The recognition that this is not about the liberals want to be all soft and mushy gushy and empathetic. And no, we actually just want to be smart. We want to be effective. We want to build safer communities, and building safer communities is being more humane. That's the more efficient way to do it.
This notion of bringing survivors into the work, it kind of reminded me, to bring full circle back to the beginning, is how you talked about the movements in the US and elsewhere really being led by people who'd formerly been in the system, and how impactful that is and how important that is. And to me, the survivor piece feels like a part of that, right? Making sure that people who are impacted one way or another by the system are brought into the changing of it.
Yes. I always say radical reimagining of it, right? No, I think that's right. And I don't actually think that is enough, that happens enough. And we actually, one of our projects in Trinidad in the Caribbean, we have a musical group of formerly incarcerated artists, and we're making an album currently. They're called Critical Mass. They're enormously talented guys. There's one woman who's part of the group, and she is a survivor of gun violence. She lost her brother to gun violence. And her brother was like her father, was her everything, they were really close, and she lost him to gun violence. And but she doesn't believe in prisons, and they never, unofficially, they never quite caught the guy, but that's not what she wants for him. And her voice is in some ways the most important voice in the group, because, she's the one saying, because we create these straw men of the victims that want revenge. There are victims that want revenge. Of course there are, but there are also plenty of survivors who think differently, who after some time realize that that's not going to bring my brother back. In fact, it's only going to make it worse. And create a further traumatized person who then goes on to harm more people. And one of the top needs of survivors is to know that this isn't going to happen to or to have some assurance that this isn't going to happen again. Prison gives us the opposite assurance. It's likely that it'll happen again because of how much prison damages people, how much the reintegration process, is stifling and damaging to people.
Yeah, I was really surprised when I was, reading your book about the lack of services. I think people assume that there are drug treatment services and mental health services and all the things that you would need. And that's just not true, I guess.
It varies so much. And it's kind of like social services on the outside. It's how much are you willing to fight for them and for yourself and for your kid to get access to this good public school. And, and when you're doing all that in the context of incarceration, it's 50 times harder. And it's hard enough in these streets, as any mother who's ever fought for her kid to go to the special needs school that is in another district or whatever. And, as anyone who's fought to see a doctor, it's hard enough in the free world.
Yeah, it is.
Imagine how hard it is then in the context of prisons. And then prisons themselves can vary from facility to facility so much in terms of what's offered. Also in part because many of the services are provided by outside agencies. So what exists depends on those, can depend on those outside agencies being present or not, state to state. How popular is the prison reform movement in some of the red states? So therefore, that means it's less fundable, maybe, in those states. And so there's just so many factors that come into play when it comes to what's available in terms of resources.
I mean, when you talk about outside agencies, it just makes me think about the whole question regarding prisons being a profit center. I just was really surprised to even learn a little bit about that whole side of this. And
well, unfortunately, so yeah, prisons are, there's all kinds of corporations making money, from the prison industry. This is more of a US thing than, or rather a global North thing than a global South thing. And the global South, nobody's, and people have their schemes and governments steal money from prison budgets as they do from other budgets. So there's certainly money making going on there too. As sad as that is, that so is the prison, the prison reentry industrial complex is also a moneymaker in the sense of you've got all these nonprofits and, who are the nonprofits run by rich people. So it's another way that rich folks run the world is by, the nonprofit industrial complex, broadly speaking. So, and that's a sad truth too. I mean, it's it doesn't matter. We're still going to take the money because we're still doing the good work. But it's always sad to me when a nonprofit is doing the work that a government should be doing, but the government isn't doing it. And so what are we going to do? Let them not do it? There's a mess to be cleaned up.
Wow. I know we're close to the end of the hour here. So I just,
you could go on.
I know we could go on. And I'm so impressed. I sent Kim your book, Baz, on Friday. I think she got it. And she must have just been sitting with a tub of ice cream just powering through it.
I'm like, how come I haven't read this book already? I guess.
I want to know what flavor goes best with my book.
I know. Let's do that. Yeah.
What flavor goes best with your book? Oh, man.
And can we have an Incarceration Nations flavor? Some sort of global
we
justice flavor? That would be awesome. I will follow up with you.
Yeah, we're going to do that. Where are you in New York this year, the coming year?
I am. I'm based in New York. I travel constantly. I generally spend a lot of time in South Africa, which is our other kind of home base for Incarceration Nations Network. I'm in Trinidad quite a bit because we've got a lot of work happening there. We now have a lot of work happening in Australia and New Zealand with our amazing comrades over there. So I'll be there. So I'm moving around, but I'm a born and raised New Yorker. So I always claim this place first. Yeah.
Okay. We just opened 2 stores in New York City and I come out pretty frequently. So we should come up with a flavor.
Guys, this is the best outcome of a podcast episode to date. This is pretty 100%. Incredible. I'm very excited for you guys to continue to stay in touch. And that's like kind of a goal of this too, it's just putting people together who wouldn't otherwise be in touch or connected. And Baz, thank you so much. I think so some of what's hard about this is it is a lot of dumb questions. This is not work that I'm steeped in every day. I mean, Kim is to an extent, she thinks about it, but there's language that we don't know, that we don't understand. There's mistakes we make. And I just want people I want a part of this podcast too, is I want people to feel like they can ask dumb questions and be met with grace and the kind of grace that you're showing us. And so I really, really appreciate what you've taught us and answering all of our questions. And it's just been lovely.
My pleasure. So great to meet you both. And, Kim, I'll see you in New York. I'm excited about this. I'm going to start collecting all of our ice cream lovers in the INN Global Justice family to be part of this collaboration.
Okay, this is going to be amazing and I can't wait. And I'm so inspired by this conversation. So this is just the beginning. We'll dig in with you.
When I started this podcast, someone asked me a really great question. He said, would you still do this even if nobody listened to it? And my answer was yes, unequivocally, absolutely no questions. I would do this even if not a single soul listened to this podcast. This project has been such a joy for me. I look forward to recording every episode, to doing the research, to bringing together two people who just like wouldn't otherwise meet. It's been just something really, really special. If you did enjoy listening and you do want to share it, that would just be an added bonus. Give it a follow, like, share, drop your comments and questions, review. We are Smart People Get Curious everywhere, Instagram, YouTube, you name it. If you have someone you'd like to see on the show, please let me know. If you have a topic you want to suggest for one of our guests, please let me know. In the meantime, stay curious. Big thanks to Cameron, my amazing producer, Ruby Western, for the incredible design, not just to the guests who join us every week, but also to their amazing EAs, executive assistants on all sides, scheduling and coordinating this podcast across multiple time zones with multiple people is no small feat. So super grateful to you.